Let's take a look at how you're going to debug that Rails app you just wrote. Hey guys, Phil here with another Ruby on Rails screencast, maybe you call it that. I'm still trying to figure out what it is I'm doing. This time we're going to talk about what I promised I would talk about a couple ones ago, and that is debugging your Ruby on Rails web application. Now, you might say, well, why do I need to debug my Ruby on Rails application? I've heard, personally I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I've heard that sometimes developers write things and they don't always work first time, or they're unusually slow, or they don't really know what's going on and why. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with those developers, but in case you're one of them, like I am, we're going to look at how we can debug, and we're going to go from kind of the absolute basic over to the fancy schmancy. And let's flip over to the screen, and I'll just get myself ready here, and we're going to talk about it. So here we are inside of Visual Studio Code. I'm going to use this contractometer app that I wrote last time for that Hotwire Stimulus Rails 6 thing. So what we're going to do here is the most basic, the absolute most basic thing you can do for debugging, and that is, of course, write log messages. Writing log messages is a completely valid way to start getting some information about your Rails app and looking at it. So let's say, for instance, on this index method, we want to know how long this thing took. So we can, create a start. We know when we started it, and then we can say Rails logger debug, right? And you can be as fancy as or verbose or whatever as you want. The index method took, and then we can just figure it out. Time current minus start. There we go. And now let's pop over. Let's run our Rails application. And let's go over to Brave. And let's take a look at localhost. And there's our index. And if we look over here, we can see the debug message. The index method took, so on and so forth. Again, in this, maybe this wasn't the best app to use to demonstrate this, but I can't think of another one right now that I have that I can let you see. But you get the idea. You can write anything you want. And, oh, you know what? I'm going to just show you some code from ZonMaster. Why not? So if we take a look at, something like ZonMaster, I'm just going to blank the screen. You're going to look at my face until I can find something that I can show you with comfort. I do use loggers quite a lot, and let's take a look at something like in Amazon. So we can take a look at this method here. So flipping to the screen, we can see how actually I do. I grab a time current, and then in here, I'm writing to the Rails logger warning message if I'm getting a standard error. And because this is a standard error in just writing an event to Elasticsearch, it's not critical. I shouldn't get an error, but you never know. And then we pull in a bunch of crap, and then you can see that I'm writing a whole bunch of things here, because these are things that we want to use. Now you might say, Phil, what's an Amazon logger? And I'm writing all this stuff out, the store's name, and all kinds of things like this. All kinds of secret proprietary information in here, folks. So that takes me to the next thing. You can see, okay, I think I accidentally closed contractometer. If we take a look at that, you said, okay, I had this other logger in there. What's the deal with that? You can create your own loggers. So what I tend to do is create an initializer here called loggers.rb. You don't always have to do this. This is if, you know, like for instance in ZonMaster, we have, and if you don't know what ZonMaster is, it's a software as a service application for Amazon sellers. If you're an Amazon seller, of course, you should be using ZonMaster to contact your customers and see your stats and analytics and all kinds of other things. So that's what we do. And so we have different areas, and we do a lot of communication, obviously, with Amazon. And so we put all of that in a separate logger, because that's kind of, if things go wrong there, that's generally, it's not our fault if something's going on with Amazon or Amazon has changed their interface. So we have a different log. Different people look at that log to see if the software should be updated. Or you can have your general log. So how do you create a different log? Well, you can create loggers like this. Should I copy and paste it? Yeah, I'm lazy. Let's do this. So you can just create a log file using, you set your, wherever you want your loggers to go. I always put them in a log file, log directory, and we call this whatever you want, and make sure that it automatically flushes. And then I create a constant. I know, constants, your people are like, Phil, you're creating a constant? What is this, 1970s? Despite what my shirt might say, no, it's not the 1970s, but it's still valid to do this. Create a constant, which is a new logger, and this will use the standard Rails logger to write stuff out. And I set the log level based on whether I'm in development or not. If I'm in development, of course, I'm going to write debug messages. And if I'm in production, I'm probably going to limit it from warning and up. And then if we wanted to write this out to something else, then we can say, what did I call it? Tasks logger. Tasks logger, then we can just say debug. We did it. Awesome. And let's restart our Rails server. Always a joy. There we go. That's why. And if we look over here, we can see we have the ordered tasks logger. And if we tail that, no, oh my God. We can see we did it. We're awesome. Gets written with the standard Rails thing, debug, timestamp, and the process ID. Okay, thing number one, done. A little bit longer than I hoped, but writing to log files and creating custom log files. That's basic thing number one. That's for the back end. What if we want to do something on the front end? And that is, again, we're talking really super basic stuff. You just want to see what the hell is coming from the back end. Let's put some information on the screen. Now if we remember, if I remember even, this is written, we have the index. The index iterates over these time trackers, and that gets written to the screen by this time tracker partial. So why don't we add something here? So if we're in Rails and development, in case some idiot accidentally puts this live, which I've done before, what we're going to do is create a div. Let's do another div and make this one the row. And make this one the column. And then what we're going to do is write out this handy dandy debug. And we know that the thing is called time tracker. Debug is a helper. And you'll see what it does. It's pretty cool, actually. There. So now at the end, so it's writing another row that will show the object, dump out the object completely in a nice pre-formatted way. And so the ID is 5, the name, and we can see all the attributes. And of course, we're such a super basic application. If you wanted to do that in something much more complicated, it can be, you would maybe put a section over here, like who's this user that we're talking about? You can put that into a div. What is this object that we've got? We can put that into some area It's just a super simple way to get some information on the screen to show you what it is that you're dealing with and what you've come up with. I really like this. These are the two basic things, and I use them a lot. These are the #1 things that I go to when I'm developing a new feature. For instance, I will probably put the debug on the screen, or I might put it into a hidden div or something like that if I really am feeling, if it's going to mess up, you know, the layout or something like that. I'll put it into a hidden div, and you can, I think we can do hidden still in BS5. Nope, we can't. Hidden. Let's see if that works. Yeah. And then if we actually look, use the inspector, which for some reason is over here. Oh, come on. Let's put you back where you belong. If we take a look. Not the form. Time trackers in 5, and we've got this hidden one in here, and then you can see the data. You can see the data there. If you don't want it to mess up your layout. Okay, that ends the basic area. Writing stuff to logs and writing debug stuff to views. That is the two most basic things. And just because they're basic doesn't mean you shouldn't be using them. And actually, I would argue that because they're basic, those are the first things you should turn to. I'll tell you this other story later on if I remember. Let's move on to some more intermediate things. There's this gem. I don't even know if this is... I'm going to get rid of this because I'll forget. We're going to add a gem here. Not you. And bundle, add Marginalia. I love this gem. This gem kind of changed, when you're doing complex, changed how we develop, actually, I would say. When you're doing really complex applications, a single method, you might have a ton of things going on, calling back to the database, doing this and doing that. And you want to see, okay, not only what calls to the database are you doing, of course, Rails tells you that all the time anyway. You know, if you don't believe me, let's do a refresh. And we can see that we selected time trackers star from time trackers, right? So Rails is always going to tell you in development what you call to the database. What Marginalia does is tells you where you called that, which is so handy, especially if you have associations and you're lazy loading and you're pulling in stuff from all over and you've got to bring it all together. Marginalia tells you where that happened. Out of the box, it writes something like this. An application is called contractometer, the controller is time trackers, and the action was index. So we know somewhere in the time trackers index, we called select star from time trackers, which we happened, of course, to know is here. Interesting that it does that reverse in memory, I guess. I wonder if you do order ID descending. See, this is the fun of Marginalia. Let's reload it. And then we can see it does order by ID descending, so it does that on the server. And it takes longer. So 0.9 milliseconds and 1.1 milliseconds. So let's go back to doing that in memory because we know we have very few. So that's nice. It tells us in there, but if you have a complicated method, then maybe you want to know exactly where you did that. And what you do is, again, we're going to create a config. What am I doing? Config, initializer, and we're going to call this Marginalia. Of course, it's an initializer. You can call it whatever you want. Marginalia, in case you didn't know, is stuff that you write in the margins of books. Cool. So what you can do is Marginalia comment dot components equals, and this sets up how that line gets written. So by default, well, we can see here by default it's application, controller, action. So that would look like, you know, application, controller, action. To me, of course, you know what application it is. I don't know why anyone would think that that was important to write. Controller, maybe. Action, I don't know. For me, just do line. And let's take a look at it. We're going to restart. Let's clear the screen and let's refresh. And now we can see that this select star from time trackers came from time trackers controller line 7. Could have made this bigger for you a while ago. Hopefully you can see. Line 7. And if we go over to the controller and we go to line 7, we can see it's right there. That is so cool and so handy. We have this running even in production because then in your MySQL query logs, slow query logs, it'll actually show you the line number that generated that query. I cannot understate how handy and useful this gem is. So that's intermediate essentials in my opinion. Because it's not even really debugging because you just put it in there. Put it in there, leave it, done. But we can, there are some other things. And this is upper level intermediate. And that is to do stuff that looks at memory. Now, okay, I'm going to say that I am not actually a fan of this kind of debugging. I'm going to say it, I'm putting it in here because the nerds out there are going to say, well, you didn't talk about it. I am not writing the Rails, compiler or whatever you want, or executable. Because there's no compiler, I'm not writing that executable. You know, I'm writing the Rails code. I expect Rails to act as they tell me it's going to act. So I don't know necessarily why I should have to memory profile my Rails application. That being said, there are times, of course, when you're I'm accidentally loading in 10,000 records from the database. You should be able to see that without memory profiling. But, okay, these kinds of memory profiling and stuff like that, enough of my whining. Let's just add them in and talk about it. So let's bundle, add memory profiler. And I'm going to have links to all of these in the show notes. Do we call them show notes still? I don't know. We're not podcasting. Memory profiler. And this will let you get a memory report. So I'm going to quickly run this just so you can see what we can do here. All I'm going to do is copy the code from the website. No. And then we can say time tracker where, created at is less than 1 month ago, which will be nothing. And then we can report dot pretty print, and it will write out huge honking big thing, how much memory was allocated, who allocated it. Again, this is good if you want to find bugs in active support. Or I'm not rewriting Rails. I'm not going to fix things in the Rails core. I'm writing applications here. I'm not looking down, certainly not looking down on developers who do that kind of thing. That's above and beyond me. I'm a app developer. I'm a solutions provider. I'm going to wait for somebody to fix it. On occasion you will find some problems, but I don't think these things are so handy. And then you're going to say, okay, what actually, so the number one thing was bootsnap. I hate that bootsnap thing. And we can see, okay, it was in this that actually that memory was allocated. And by location, I'm not sure what the difference between file and location is, to be honest. And so if we take a look at the memory profiler, they will give you some other ways that you can use it. It's interesting, you know. I don't think it helps actually debug applications. Okay, here's the story I was going to say. You know, about 20 years ago, so I'm working in this company that we are writing real-time interactive MIDI software. This is long before, you know, well, this is 20 years ago, long before interactive stuff on the internet. And it was letting people, you know, jam together with their keyboards live on the internet. And, you know, we would write this software and then there'd be a problem and it wouldn't work. And my first thing, of course, would be to look through my source code. But there was another guy in the company, his first thing would be to get the memory profiler out and look and see if the C compiler was working right and stuff like that. In my personal philosophy, maybe this says more about me than anything else, is that I'm pretty sure the problem's going to be me. You know, like when I'm writing a piece of software, even in Rails, if something doesn't work right, I don't immediately look to see if the Rails library is going wrong or the gem I'm using is going wrong. I pretty much look at my code because, you know, I wrote that. It probably starts and stops with me. Sometimes it'll be someone else. So you can use memory profiler for that, to look at memory profiling. And there's other things you can do. There's this derailed benchmarks. And this is kind of interesting as well. Again, they're looking at memory, blah, blah, blah. What you might want to do is benchmark some of your, sorry I'm scrolling so fast, benchmark you know, your loading of objects, benchmark how a particular method works, especially if that method is going off and perhaps making multiple calls. My feeling is that all of that can be found without using these tools. Again, if you're that kind of if you're interested in that kind of thing, I'm just not. I mean, so maybe if you're that person, I should have told you at the beginning so you didn't have to watch this. But you can do some stack profiling. It is interesting on an academic way. So there's memory profiler, derailed benchmark, and stack prof that you can put into your app and see some pretty detailed stuff about what's happening inside of your application as far as memory and low-level stuff. I'm not going to say any more than that because I don't really use it that much and I'm not the right person to talk about it. What I am the right person to talk about is Byebug. Now, Byebug gets installed by default. Here you'll see it in your gem file in a group of development and test, Byebug. Byebug is so cool, I'll show you why. Again, it's a very simple application. Maybe I can find something a little more sophisticated, but so we're going to put Byebug in there. That's all we need to do. Going to run Rails. And we're going to hit the index. And we're going to see over here where the Rails server is being run, we've dropped into some kind of command line thing. This is what Byebug does. It lets you see the stack as it's going. And it uses all kinds of crazy short codes. My recommendation is to find a cheat sheet that works well with you and your style and look at that. So we can list, which will show you the listing, or we can look at our local variables. This is what's neat. And we can step one line. So we can step through our code line by line, and then we can look and we can see start has been set to this value. And let's step again, and it'll go off, it'll do all those things. You know, it grabbed all the objects out of the database. We can see at that point what happens on a single line of code, and we can look at the variables again, and we can, oh yeah, because it's not local variables. Is it global variables? Yeah. So we can list all the global variables. It's a pretty powerful piece of software. Super handy. I've used it so much to find out what's happening when you make a call, you know, to step through something so complicated, because you can also, you know, okay, we can continue this and let the thing run. you don't have to just say Byebug. You can say Byebug if, you know, and then so you can conditionally drop into a breakpoint, which is what I like about it. So, you know, I can say, okay, you know, I can do it the first time through or something like that, or 10th time through. So we can, you know, if we're calling out again with Zonmaster, if we're calling out to Amazon, we can just drop into one of those calls and say, okay, what's happening here step by step, line by line. It's really, really handy. Byebug is an absolute must know as far as I'm concerned, as for Ruby developers. There we go. Did I talk about that enough? I don't know. You can see all of the commands here, catch, and it's like a whole, it is a whole integrated console. Step through things, step into things, step over things. If you're used to using interactive debuggers in other languages like C or C++ or something, for me this is the same kind of thing. It's great. You have to use it. On a similar note, there's another one called Web Console, and which is also included by default. And I'm going to give you, okay, quick summary here. What have we done? We did the basics. We did the Marginalia. We did the memory gems. We've just done Byebug. Now we're going to do Web Console. A couple of little tips about Web Console. So Web Console lets you can do the back end. I've never really understood the point of it, but you can do the back end, but you can just chuck, let's go into the index, and at the top here, we're just going to put console. I think you have to do equals console. Let's see what happens. And we're going to get this thing at the bottom, which is kind of like, I'm sorry, haven't figured out how to make it bigger, so that's a little bit frustrating. So we can say time trackers, for instance, and it'll show. So you have kind of the same kind of thing, except it's not stopped the operation. So if we look over here at the console, that is done. You know, you can look back at the variables that have come in. But if we say time tracker, it's not gonna, we haven't stopped inside of one of these, for instance. So we've kind of looking at all the data we sent to the front end or whatever after. So it's certainly handy because, you know, you can see who's the current user. We're not using device, but if you were using current user or whatever. Oh, current page, what's that? False. And so you can do all of that. It gives you a little web console at the bottom. Here's my tip for the more advanced developers out there. I personally rarely ever hit localhost. I always use something called Ngrok. Now Ngrok, I probably should do a whole other thing on that, but Ngrok lets you run virtual names. Did I even do that? Maybe I did. Did I? No. Let's see if we can find. Okay, I don't have an Ngrok around, but let's zip over. You know, I'm showing you all the goodies here today. So we bash Ngrok. Ngrok lets you run virtual domains and point them to your local machine. Huge security hole, but it's very handy for developing real-world applications. It lets you send something, give an address outside. So now if I do this, it actually is going to hit to my thing. It's going to say you can't do it because you don't have host added. So let's add in the host. I didn't need to restart that. I need to restart this. So now we're going to have this, and it hits an outside thing. This is great, except console, as you may notice, is no longer there. And you'll see things cannot render console from, so on and so forth. I might have to obfuscate all of that information, sorry. So what you can do in that case is add kind of a whitelist. So we can config web console white-listed IPs, and then you can give a list of IPs. And if you want to do all IPv6 things, you can just do that. Let's start it again. And there's our web console. So it's working even if we're hitting something else and we see we can render the console now. That's the one gotcha really with web console. All right, I think that's pretty much it for my talk about debugging Rails applications. I didn't use the best Rails application to demo that, but I think you can get the idea. I'm going to put up a list of instructions. I'll put, I think, a gist. You call it a gist or a gist? A gist up on GitHub that will have all the instructions that I've used here. And so you can start debugging. And if you need any help debugging your app, why don't you drop a comment on this video? And maybe if I'm not being clear, maybe I can do a follow-up or something like that. You never know. Thanks for watching. Always a pleasure. And I'm really grateful to all of you who are watching and commenting and subscribing and all of that. If you haven't done so, do so now. See you soon.